Okay, part 2. So, I remembered another metaphor I wanted to add, which is really cool. You know how like when we write, there are sentences and there are periods and question marks and everything, and I thought about it. A life where you feel like you're rushing is like a life where you forget the periods in a book. And how did I come up with that, you might ask? Well, it's because I was reading the beginning of this and I realized I'd almost forgotten how to read because I wasn't stopping at the periods. And when I wasn't stopping at the periods, I had to like pause and go back and like stop. Because otherwise I was like reading and it was going too fast and I wasn't making sense. Like it wasn't entering me. Nothing was entering my brain because of how fast I was reading because I wasn't pausing, stopping. Like I didn't get what was happening. And I thought about it and I'm like, when I'm rushing in life, when I'm rushing through anything, it's like a book without periods. It's like a complete full run-on sentence and it's like so exhausting. Completely exhausting and confusing. So remember to leave the periods in your sentences, kids. You need those. But on another note, I'm continuing to read. And listen to this. There's this, I'm on chapter 3, like page 11 and 12, where this woman, who is the main character, like the narrator of the book, she is meeting this kid, who I think is about 5 at this point. And she says, well, I guess I'm just going to read this whole part. When the first large shipments of Greenlanders began arriving in Denmark in the 1930s, one of the first things they wrote home was that the Danes are such pigs, they keep dogs in their house. Number 1, comment about that. Hilarious, because it reminds me of something my mom used to say, where it's like, try explaining that to someone in English. We're like, oh, they're such pigs, they're dogs, right? And it's like, the word pigs doesn't mean like literal pigs, you know, like it means like, oh, like dirty or like whatever, like not like organized or clean or something, you know, like as an insult. And I find it really interesting reading that. Reminds me of my mom. And then, okay, for a moment, I think it's a dog lying on the stairs. Then I see that it's a child. And this particular day, that is not much better. Beat it, you little shit, I say. Isaiah looks up. Berit, he says. Beat it yourself. There aren't many Danes who can tell by looking at me. They think there's a trace of something Asian, especially when I put a shadow under my cheekbones. But the boy on the stairs looks right at me with a gaze that cuts straight through to what he and I have in common. It's the kind of look you see in newborns. Later it vanishes, sometimes reappearing in extremely old people. This could be one reason I've never burdened my life with children. I've thought too much about why people lose the courage to look each other in the eye. I've thought too much about why people lose the courage to look each other in the eye. Why do people lose the courage to look each other in the eye? I'm thinking about that, and it's a good point, but I don't know if I understand it completely, because I can look Kavita in the eye. I feel so wonderful when I look Kavita in the eye, or like when I look into Kavita's eyes. I feel like the reason I don't really like looking into people's eyes is because I feel like I can feel their energy too well when I do that. And I feel like some people, I can tell their energy isn't great without even looking them in the eye. And then when I feel that, I make sure I don't look them in the eye. But I feel like there's a lot of power to looking in people's eyes. And yeah, I feel like with kids, there isn't as much harm there. Like, they're purer, even if they do things that seem mean or like not okay or like, you know, kind of dirty. And by dirty, I mean like licking the glue stick, biting the popsicle stick that was just on the ground. Anyway, yeah, it's like looking them in the eyes is one thing. Looking old people in the eyes is another thing. I feel like some old people, right? Like, not all old people, some old people. I do get what she's saying, but I feel like there's more danger kind of in looking people in the eye when they're like around my age. And it's not that I don't do it. I feel like I do, but I feel like I'm kind of cautious about it. Because like some people got bad vibes and I don't want to see that. Like I don't want that to enter my sphere, so I'm like, look away, you know? Anyway, listen to this. Will you read me a story? He asks. I have a book in my hand. That's what prompted his question. One might say he looks like a forest elf, but since he is filthy, dressed only in underpants and glistening with sweat, one might also say he looks like a seal pup. Piss off, I say. Don't you like kids? I eat kids. He steps aside. Saluvted, you're lying, he says as I go past. At that moment I see two things in him that somehow link us together. I see that he is alone, the way someone in exile will always be. And I see that he is not afraid of solitude. What's the book? He shouts after me. Euclid's Elements, I say, slamming the door. It turned out to be Euclid's Elements after all. That's the one I take out that very evening when the doorbell rings and he is standing outside and is still in his underpants, staring straight at me. And I step aside as he walks into my apartment and into my life. Never really to leave it again. Then it is Euclid's Elements that I take down from the bookshelf, as if to chase him away, as if to establish from the start that I have no books that can interest a child, that he and I cannot meet over a book, or in any other way, as if to avoid something. We sit down on the sofa. He sits on the very edge with his legs crossed, the way kids from Tool used to sit at Inglefield in the summertime, on the edge of the dog sleigh, used as a bed inside the tent. A point is that which cannot be divided. A line is length without breadth. That's her reading from the book. Can I just say, how did I find this exact, this is my magic book sense working. This is my magic book sense book right now. Ooh, I haven't had one of those in a while, but I feel like this is it. They come to me at the right time, magically out of nowhere. I just pick it out of a bookshelf and it happens to be the perfect book for me that I need to read at that time, and I can pinpoint the exact time, an exact book that happened to me in middle school, and I can pinpoint a book it happened to me with in high school and in college. I can pinpoint a few books that were exactly that. And here we have Euclid's Elements. We were literally reading Euclid's Elements in my geometry class. I literally have read that definition and thought about that definition and written that definition in my geometry class notebook, and I fucking loved geometry. I fucking loved it, and I loved when we got to taxicab geometry and spherical geometry. And I'll be honest, I don't remember everything. I didn't memorize every single fucking definition, but I like the logic, and I like the shapes, and I like the drawing. And I remember the discussion surrounding this definition. A point is that which cannot be divided. A line is length without breadth. And it's like the very basic elements of any sort of math, whether it's geometry, whether it's algebra, whether it's something else, like the most basic elements of something, they don't really have definitions. You're just saying that they exist. And like, this was like an entire discussion even about like the philosophy of math and like what math really is, because you have all these things that you're doing math with, right? Math is like the art of patterns, of making patterns. It's like the art of ideas. And in order to work with things, you need things to work with, right? Like you need the lines and you need the points in geometry, right? And then from there you start defining what the shapes are. But you're defining the shapes using the lines and the points. But the lines and the points themselves don't have definitions. But you need to sort of understand what's happening if you're going to be using these things that are these basic elements. And so my professor was explaining to us, like, yeah, no one really knows how to define the basic elements, but you try. Like, you give them some sort of definition, something, so that you can work with it, you know? So, like, you feel better about it, and then you move on. Like, you try to define it. And like other things, they have their specific definitions. Like triangles have their specific definitions. Squares, like rectangles, using these things of like lines, points, angles, you know? But what are lines, points, angles? You know, no one actually knows what a point is. No one actually knows what a line is. Anyway, I love this. This book turns out to be the one he never comments on, and the one we keep returning to. Occasionally, I try others. On one occasion, I borrow the children's book, Rasmus Klump on the Ice Cap. In all serenity, he listens to the description of the first pictures. Then he points a finger at the drawing of the bear, Rasmus Klump. "What does that one taste like?" he asks. A semicircle is a figure contained within a diameter, and the circumference intersected by the diameter. For me, the reading goes through 3 phases on that first evening in August. First, there is simply irritation at the whole impractical situation. Then there is the state of mind that always comes over me at the mere thought of that book. Veneration. What does veneration mean? The knowledge that it is the foundation, the boundary, that if you work your way backwards, past Lobachevsky and Newton, and as far back as you can go, you end up with Euclid, on the greater of 2 given unequal straight lines. Then at some point I no longer see what I'm reading. At some point there is only my voice in the living room and the light of the sunset from Sidhavnen. And then my voice isn't even there. It's just me and the boy. At some point I stop and we simply sit there, gazing straight ahead as if I were 15 and he were 16 and we reached the point of no return. Sometime later he gets up very quietly and leaves. I watch the sunset, which lasts 3 hours at this time of year, as if the sun on the verge of leaving has discovered qualities in the world that are now causing it to have second thoughts about departing. Of course, Euclid didn't scare him off. Of course, it made no difference what I read. For that matter, I could have read aloud from the telephone directory, or from Lewis and Curtis's detection and classification of ice. He would have come anyway, just to sit with me on the sofa. During some periods, he would come every day, and then a couple weeks might pass when I would see him only once, and from a distance. But when he did come, it was usually just starting to get dark, when the day was over and Julianne was out cold. Once in a while, I would give him a bath. He didn't like hot water, but it was impossible to get him clean and cold. I would put him in the bathtub and turn on the handheld shower. He wouldn't complain. Long ago, he had learned to put up with adversity, but not for one moment did he take his reproachful eyes off my face. Am I the only one in love with this right now? If you work your way backwards, you end up with Euclid. Yeah, you do. You know, there's something I'm thinking about. It's like this scene that I think happens in one of the books of the Mysterious Benedict Society, where one of the students goes up to like this hidden observatory and is studying there. And also, being the fact that I've watched the movies not that long ago, and I read the books a really long time ago, I'm thinking that maybe that scene isn't even in these books, but I have it in my mind from some book somewhere a really long time ago. And it's so beautiful because like that world in that book is still very similar to this world. Yet there's like this hideaway, this like small observatory to look at the stars, and like this grassy path to like walk through to get there. And like it's like quiet and calm within the sky, within nature, like time to study and like be curious. And like that sentence about that if you work your way backwards you end up with Euclid, like it just reminds me of that. I think it's so cool. And I love that this book has math in it that I know. Anyway, I'm gonna keep reading. Those were the comments I wanted to make as like an extension to what I was talking about earlier to myself. So, yeah. I love this book. I want to read books with people. I miss